content warning for eating disorders, disease, terrorism, Nazis, ableism, and Jimmy Savile. People might laugh uproariously at the 1790s craze in revolutionary France for dressing à la victime, when French fashionistas would imitate the looks of guillotine victims by wearing white dresses similar to the condemned person's ankle-length smock, cutting their hair short in the same way these political prisoners had theirs shorn for a faster cut, and sporting scarlet chokers around their necks to mark the guillotine's passage. Some might give a frustrated sigh of, "Oh, triggered millennial," when they hear that Napoleon Bonaparte once made his sister Pauline change out of the ghostly white dress that she had chosen one day because it reminded him too much of this 20-year-old Parisian fashion. Well then, let's join old Nappy in discussing some more modern costumes which should perhaps have made the people wearing them think twice before capitalising on real-world events. I mention this to set the stage because it is Halloween again, that time of year where people dress in silly costumes but aren't royalty. Despite originally being a religious event tied to paganism and later usurped by Christianity, because if there's one thing Christianity does well, it's look at other cultures and go, mine. The celebration of Halloween has taken on a very secular form. Of course, you will still find religious-themed events such as the Edinburgh Samhain Festival, but mostly it's a chance to go out, get drunk whilst dressed as a sexy Pluto the dog. But aside from the vampires, the zombies, the people who just throw on a onesie and say, "done," there are many other costumes that cross the line from cheap and tacky to downright awful. I'm not one for being easily offended. In fact, these costumes don't offend me per se, but they are seriously questionable and in many cases making a joke out of a very serious illness or condition. I'm not saying they should be banned. After all, everyone has the right to be a bit of a fanny, and video makers like myself have the right to point this out because you have to wonder what these people were thinking. Last year, eBay had to ban Jeffrey Dahmer costumes from sale after an uptake in interest from people wanting to dress up as him, despite much protestation that actually maybe dressing up as a real-life serial killer isn't really a great idea. The obsession was spurred on by the recent drama series that Netflix commissioned and has become a massive hit among true crime fans. Of course, badly thought out costumes of mass murderers isn't new. Folk have always dressed up as the truly awful, and many in Britain will be hard-pressed to forget the time Prince Harry dressed up as a Nazi for a Halloween party. This is probably made even worse by the fact that despite his grandmother, the late Queen, serving as an ambulance driver during World War II, her uncle, former King Edward, was a fairly big fan of old Adolf, and there have been a lot of criticisms in recent years of the royal family's less than progressive views. It's not just Halloween where people dress up to unimpress, of course. Only a few weeks back I heard from a local bar manager that had to kick out a bachelor party. They were all dressed as schoolboys. Nothing too odd about that, you might think, until you learn that the groom was dressed as notorious British paedophile Jimmy Savile. Though of course people are not the only options for awkward Halloween costumes, this picture did the rounds a while back. The women in it received a torrent of abuse that, to be fair, was unacceptable, but coming just a few years after the worst terrorist attack in US history, it understandably upset a lot of people. I am sure they thought the idea was edgy and clever. In fact, we only need look at their ages when this happened in 2013. They were both 19, meaning they were 7 when the towers were attacked. Now that is still old enough to understand, but they will remember it in much the same way as I remember the fall of the Berlin Wall, or the death of Princess Diana. Something huge that happened, but not something that particularly impacted my life, as I was too young to really understand the importance. They were also British, which gives a bit more distance. None of this at all excuses them. They are old enough to have known full well the details of the attacks and how it still over a decade on impacted global politics. People are still mourning the death of loved ones. People are still dying as a direct result of the attacks. The pair issued a statement in response to the criticism. "We never meant to be offensive, but we apologise if any offence was caused. The idea was to depict a modern-day horror that happened in our lifetime and was not intended as a joke." Okay? I'm not entirely sure how depicting a real-life horror is what Halloween is about. We don't dress as Holocaust victims, we don't dress as decapitated victim of ISIS, and if people do, they get called out on it. As terrible as that costume is, in a very roundabout way, it at least has something to do with Halloween. As atrocious as it is, at least they were attempting to go for horror. But allow me now to introduce you to the sexy Ebola nurse costume. Of course, there have been doctor costumes, there's even a plague doctor costume, though admittedly that is at least potentially scary. It's not that this is a containment suit, that in itself would at least have got a pass, even if it has nothing to do with Halloween, but the specifics of the suit are what brought it to my attention. Ebola is a deadly disease, and this suit came out as a result of a mass pandemic in parts of Africa and later spread overseas. Someone sat down and decided to try and market a costume based on a current catastrophe. At least the 9/11 costume isn't for sale. This costume attempts to monetize disaster. Not offended by this, I doubt anyone actually is. It is certainly a costume that seems cheap and could only have been worse if the costume included Ebola makeup. And of course, how could we ignore the COVID years? There have been full-on inflatable COVID virus costumes and the ever-popular hand sanitizer. This feels in poor taste. I mean, using the pandemic in a cynical way to try and promote a product feels at best tacky. No, don't show that poster. Yes, I designed it, but there's context. Moving on. All right, sticking with the sexy theme, meet anorexia. I cannot for a second imagine the thought process behind this. Was this designed at a meeting where no one was present and a squirrel accidentally okayed it? What were these people thinking? Was the intention behind it to actually offend? Was it a social experiment so we can weed out the people? The website selling it describes it thus: you can never be too rich or too thin. Knit dress with glitter screen print. Includes headband, choker neckband, removable anorexia badge, and ribbon tie belt. 1.6 million people in the UK deal with an eating disorder of some type. These aren't all anorexia, of course, but anorexia itself will affect around 2% of the population in any given year, and those who know someone with anorexia will be even higher. Anorexia is a serious and life-threatening illness. The idea that someone decided it was a suitable sexy Halloween costume and that you can never be too thin speaks of a mentality that is callous. As with the Ebola suit, it suggests a fetishization of serious illness, that we have run out of the millions of other costume alternatives and need to focus on making ill people feel worse. And on that topic of illness for sport, we have this classic. This costume created a humongous uproar when it was revealed Tesco were selling it.
Hey, just jumping in during the edit, yes, new hair. Just to clarify that actually it was Asda that was selling this particular costume, Tesco weren't. They were selling this one, which is, you know, much better.
The company quickly responded and removed it from sale, but you can find alternatives anywhere. There have already been countless articles on this costume, so I won't labour the point. The costume contributes to the stigma of mental illness, much like with the anorexia costume. We already have pretty bad attitudes to mental illness, telling depressives to just cheer up and assuming all schizophrenics are dangerous and violent. Costumes like this help to demonise those with mental health issues and continue the worrying trend of using life-threatening illness as a cheap gimmick. This Halloween, try not to dress like anything we've seen in this video. There are many costumes you can wear that aren't going to be mocking serious illness, domestic abuse, disease or terrorism. I'm not calling for a ban, I'm not being precious. I just think it's easy to not be a c***. Have a happy Halloween, and please, do have nightmares. Goodbye.